How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. Bryan Kohberger, high-profile inmates and the psychology of punishment. So even though Bryan Kohberger is the lens we're looking through today, this dialogue could refer to any high-profile inmate. And we're going to talk about how they're housed and basically the psychology of punishment. But here's the unique part. Me and my guest, Russ, we're not psychologists. I may have a degree in psychology, but I'm not a psychologist. We are correctional professionals. So the stuff that we are going to be providing today are going to come from that lens. And I think it's a very unique lens. It's a lens that most people may undervalue. But me and Russ know it's definitely a needed lens in this profession because it relates to our survival. And there's a lot you learn when you are in survival mode. These questions have come to me from fans of Duty Ron, so it's more related to true crime. So we're going to provide a very unique perspective. Me and Russ see these as very challenging questions, but like always, we are going to give it a try. We did some research here to add to the background of what we're going to be discussing. Now, again, even though we're seeing it through the lens of Bryan Kohberger, the basic story could pretty much apply to a lot of high-profile inmates. I mean, there are some caveats here, but for the most part. But let me get Russ. What up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former correctional officer and later on correctional sergeant for California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I'm also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos with a K on Facebook. That's really dedicated to the great men and women in this fantastic profession, and just supporting them, mentoring them, giving them history and content and fellowship. I am also the new author of a book called Killing Complacency, which is about maintaining tactical awareness within correctional settings for all correctional professionals. And I think that about rounds things out, although I will say that earlier on in my career, I started at San Quentin back in 1989. And I did a lot of time on death row. I know that Bryan Kohberger is not on death row. However, he will be a high-profile, high notoriety inmate, which is something that I have a little bit of experience with.
Yes, and I can also complement that experience as well. I have dealt with high-profile inmates. Guys, I also have books on the market as well, everything from Inmate Manipulation Decoded, Undue Familiarity, Manager and Correctional Facility, a lot of stuff. Please check out Amazon for some ebooks, some softcover books. Also, I am published through Blue 360 Media, so I also have books out there as well. So, Russ, let me do a little background here for us first real quick. So, again, Bryan Kohberger, high-profile inmates, the psychology of punishment. Let me just give a brief synopsis of Kohberger's case real quick. So, Bryan Kohberger, that's him right there. Was convicted in the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. What made this case even more unnerving was who he was. So he was a PhD student studying criminal behavior and now sitting on the other side of the system. Let me go ahead and get rid of this picture real quick. So in 2025, Kohberger pled guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. He now resides at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, that's IMSI, under long-term restrictive housing, isolated, high risk, and high profile. Now, again, this topic isn't just about Kohberger. It's about what correctional professionals deal with every day when housing high-profile inmates. It's about how behavior, psychology, routine, and reputation collide in real time, not on paper, but in units, showers, escort routes, and staff briefings. So this breakdown uses Kohberger as a lens, but the questions apply far beyond one inmate. So it's funny. I got a quote here. How do we manage the mind of someone the world is watching when we're the ones doing the watching? I do want to mention something real quick. I wanted to look into the background of Kohberger just to kind of get an understanding of who he is. And what was unique about it is that he's got a lot of unique characteristics that definitely can add to this discussion, because I think a lot of people may not understand how complicated it is when it comes to overseeing the inmates that's in our charge. So I have a couple of things I want to share that's going to add to this dialogue. And by the way, even though this is unique in Kohberger's case, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have dealt with high-profile inmates that have dealt with pieces of this. Maybe not all connected, but definitely pieces of this. So for Kohberger, he has his academic profile, so I wanted to look at that first. So very book smart, system focused. Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. He studied serial killers, criminal behavior, and policing. Even applied for an internship at a local police department. He had advanced knowledge of investigative procedures, offender profiling, and the inner workings of the justice system. So some insight from a correctional perspective is staff should assume Kohberger understands chain of custody, surveillance blind spots, inmate movement schedules, and psychological assessment methods. He may anticipate institutional patterns and attempt to exploit or subvert them in subtle policy compliant ways. So as staff, we would watch for procedural challenges phrased using policy language, over familiarity with institutional or legal terminology, and attempts to educate staff or test knowledge through conversation. Does that make sense to you, Russ?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different, inmates. They become, kind of the jailhouse lawyers, if you will. And they tend to have like really kind of a overinflated view of what their actual abilities and their actual knowledge is. I can't say that this is true of him, but what I can say is that for all of his knowledge and, his supposed education in this, it didn't get him very far. He ended up having to take a plea. So, after, all of this, the media kind of, propping him up and making him into being something that he's clearly not, we're still left with, who really is this Bryan Kohberger guy? And, I just don't see him as, probably being, very successful at manipulating anything, including the system. I think that a lot of that is media hype. And I think that, he's going to have a tougher time than he expects. In the end, what did he do? He caved to the pressures of the system in order to remove himself from the possibility of being executed, even though Idaho hasn't carried out executions in many, many years. And I would say that their death penalty system is really, really broke. So he kind of just, panicked and threw in the towel. In my estimation, that's my personal assessment of it.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of Ted Bundy a little bit, how they hiked him as well. And yet what happened to him eventually, he wound up being executed for what he's done. Now, they also have diagnosed traits for him. They have ASD, so that's autism spectrum disorder, and obsessive tendencies. So defense confirmed that Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder and obsessive compulsive tendencies. He has been described as highly rigid, literal, and lacking social nuance. And that may be what Russ also mentioned about the manipulation aspect. There's a thing about manipulation that does require charisma, some level of adapting to who you are dealing with. So if Kohberger's strict on the rules, and all he may just do is take things literally and maybe challenge it, but as gaining influence, that may be a bit harder for him, because gaining influence is really about reading people, reading situations, and then making adaptions as need be. But really good manipulators, they're charismatic. And he's also noted for extremely repetitive behaviors, including hand washing, long showers, and pacing. Now, for correctional insight, routine is both his comfort and his coping mechanism, but also a potential control tactic. Disruptions may lead to visible distress, withdrawal, or aggressive reactions. These behaviors may appear compliant on the surface, but carry deeper meaning. So what to watch for staff would be unusual stress response to minor schedule changes, excessive cleanliness or order in cell, and repetitive movements or verbal fixations that escalate under pressure. And it's funny because in corrections, it's all about control and routine. So there could be a good chance that, I'm sure he's done it in the jail already, but getting to the prison, it's being more long term. He just kind of falls compliant into the routine and winds up not being a challenge in regards to that. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, there's a few different things on that. My experience with serial killers, I guess in his case, as far as we know, he would be actually termed as a mass killer because it was one single spree, as far as we know. But knowing those guys, they're the ones that tend to not do well interfacing with staff, communicating. They do tend to be the ones that like to put a lot of things on paper because it kind of, tracks and documents things for them because they're simply, really not good at actual communication skills. My expectation of him is that he will probably be very reliant on whatever their grievance procedure is. I don't think that there's going to be much for him to do in the way of as far as like, having to have certain legal access or anything like that. He's waived a great deal of being able to actually appeal anything that he's done as part of his plea case. So I think that wherever he ends up, and we know that right now he's in Idaho, they're not going to have to necessarily worry about that aspect with regards to legal things. I don't think. So I think that what he will do is he will be one of the legal beagles, putting stuff on paper, but probably not interfacing with staff very much, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And Russ, I totally agree with you. So when I worked at another prison, I won't go into too much details here, but when I retire, I will. There was an individual that was very similar in these characteristics, and he had wanted obsessive control, even of the smallest things. One being some type of shampoo, and the other being Christmas cards. And the funny thing is from being removed, you may think, oh, these are small things, but to them, this is their control. So they're fighting for something that is controlled and within their routine. And once you start moving the smallest of things from that routine, their whole world in their mind has lost a sense of control. So again, you have to be very wary of even the smallest changes for those types of individuals. And last part I have here real quick, just more of a background, was social and emotional detachment. Social and emotional detachment, which kind of relates to what we just said, known for flat affect, intense stares, and difficulty in forming natural conversation. Jail sources noted little interest in small talk, but occasional frustration when ignored, and may struggle with hierarchy unless it's consistent and clearly enforced. Now, what's the insight here? Social detachment may appear as non-threatening, but also signals low emotional feedback, meaning he may escalate without warning signs that staff typically rely on, like tone, posture, and emotion. And I agree with that. I have dealt with inmates that really do. You think that they've just exploded on something, but they haven't. It's piled up, and then finally it gets released. Like there's no middle ground. There's no getting there. It's either you're there or you're not. Have you dealt with that, Russ? And those inmates can be very hard to manage because you don't understand at that moment what's really triggering them. Is it the little thing that happened now, or was it something that piled up that they had to make adjustments to that they just couldn't absorb well?
I think there's a lot to that. And I was kind of, supposing he might fall into that realm of kind of what we call the flat affect, type of presentation of his personality or whatever. And that just means like he doesn't seem to get overly excited or sad or happy or anything else. And you just kind of get this real blasé interaction without a lot of any, let's say, emotional input into it. But those types, and the way that I've experienced them is, they can go from that flat affect to, sheer rage, at the drop of a hat. Now, I don't know if he's going to necessarily be like that. He seems a little bit more staid. From what I was able to find out, I didn't hear about like any real super, serious disciplinary issues that he had. But my experience with people very much like him, though, is there are some, and I'm talking about killers here, that really they are pushing the button of every single thing, and they're on top of it, and they're very angry or passionate or dismissive of everything that you're doing in and around them. We had Lawrence Bittaker, and he was just completely just a complete idiot with regards to his interactions. He couldn't say or do anything, and he was constantly mad at staff and belittling them, and trying to sue in court for the fact that he got a soggy sandwich and this, that, and the other thing. And then you have other ones that are much more staid, and I won't say composed, but they give like the illusion of composure. And that's kind of what my take on him is, without any obvious actual interaction or anything. He just seems like, he's more of what we would call like really super socially awkward. And so I think that is what they're going to experience from this guy. It's hard to say where he's going to end up. I know that there's been, some talk about, housing him in other places, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So, and obviously this also kind of explains how he was able to do what he did. I mean, if he doesn't have a connection to the human element, if he doesn't feel how it, empathetic, sympathetic, whatever it is, you can kind of see that there is a separation. So maybe to him, everything is about objects and control, so even when they act impulsively, maybe it's their effort of trying to hold on to control until finally they can't, and then they become impulsive, and at that point there, they lose control in their effort to gain control. But again, it's something that's probably piled on. But again, most of the people that commit these type of crimes objectify the victim. They don't see the victims as we would see the victims. They see the victims as objects, as something that's meant to serve a purpose and be done with. And I think that definitely fits into someone who could have these traits. Okay, so now this is where we start talking about the main part. So part one, isolation, when housing becomes a mental battle. So I'm going to read the situation. I'm going to read the correctional focus, and then I have 2 questions for each section, and there's 6 sections. Section 4 actually has 3 Section 4 actually has 3 questions. But these are going to be questions that are going to challenge us a little bit. But mind you, me and Russ, we're not psychologists. We're just going to provide a perspective from, frontline advantage, because that we do have an advantage working with these individuals and understanding their mindset. So, we may not deal with them intensely for an hour a day, but we do deal with them for 24 hours a day, and it does grow in that intensity. May not be as open as someone would be with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But I think the one thing about us is when you deal with people for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the mask starts to come off. So maybe in some cases they try to sell an image for an hour, but in our cases, we find the truth behind the mask. So here's the situation. So Kohberger is housed in near total isolation, 23 hours a day in a single cell. It's protective, not punitive. But for someone with obsessive traits and rigid thinking, it can be seen as a pressure chamber. Officers see what isolation does long before mental health form catches up. Pacing, mumbles, over-grooming, withdrawn eye contact. So in solitary, I hate the word solitary, but this is how they're referring to it here. Because remember, in this case here, it's protective custody. So it's not punitive. It's just this is where he can be best managed safely, at least for the time being, because his case has a lot of notoriety connected to it. So you got to be wary of who you house him with. So in an effort to control that, you kind of house them alone. But I will say, usually all efforts of protective custody do work towards another level of congregate protective custody, where you can try to eventually house them with somebody else and give them some time with other individuals. But at the very beginning, it's probably going to be some form of non-congregate. So again, we got overgroup, withdrawal, eye contact, and solitary. The environment isn't just the cell, it's the inmate's own mind, and staff are the first to hear and see the cracks. So what's the focus here? So again, for correctional staff, we don't need a diagnosis. We read behavior. And behavior under isolation shows us whether our placement is working or slowly turning into a risk. So Russ, I got two questions that we could explore real quick. First question: what does psychological unraveling look like from the officer's view, and how can we catch it before it escalates?
So I think when I look at a guy like Kohberger, I think that staff are really important in this, because what staff are able to read are what his baseline is, right? His baseline is, from everything that I've heard about him, is kind of already out of whack with regards to how we view things in our normal social constructs. So that's not really usable, for the puzzle house people that are looking at him and maybe trying to deliver some type of therapy for him, because he's already outside the bounds of normal sociology. So I think it's when things start to happen that are in addition to what his baseline brings is where staff is going to have to be careful. There's probably a chance, I won't say a big chance, because I think he's too internal to get really so upset that he's going to commit suicide. But what do I know? I could be wrong. He seems like he's such a social outcast that remaining as a social outcast probably isn't going to affect him very much. But if he does start to unravel, I would expect to see it in things like a lot of passive aggressive behavior towards staff. I would expect maybe for him to engage in some misbehavior, like not giving his tray back after it's been given to him. I might expect that he would be verbally abusive towards staff. I don't want to get into the complacency angle here, but I think that probably he would not be too very likely to commit, big acts of violence. He doesn't strike me as that type, but universal precautions apply, because he obviously already has psychopathic tendencies. So we can't just discount that out of hand. But the way that he conducts himself socially leads me to believe that. I think actually that he's going to do okay with regards to things, because he just doesn't have that need to really socialize with people anyway. That's what got him here. But that's just the way I think of it, and that's only based on having dealt with a lot of killers, and psychopaths and sociopaths that are like this. I think that he's actually going to do okay in that regards.
All right, now for me, guys, I want you to mention something. Russ mentioned baseline. It's a great observation, but mind you, every inmate has a different baseline. So look how well staff's got to know each and every inmate. So let's say for Kohberger, who I would like to think staff would be aware of some of these concerns, I'm probably going to expect a very neat cell. I mean, very pristine, clean, everything nicely folded. I'm going to expect very limited interaction with him unless we're behind something. Like I could picture if we deliver food every day at 4:00 and it's now 4:01, I could picture him trying to get the officer's attention to try to say, hey, what's happening? The food's usually delivered by now. Usually when you have inmates that rely on this level of control is because they have established in their mind a sense of control that involves that routine. That's why for them, it becomes very rigid. If they lose out on even a minute of that, their whole world tends to fall apart. So if I was walking by the cell, I wouldn't be struck by a guy like this pacing back and forth, a very neat cell. Mind you, you could have someone that has a messy cell, and all of a sudden their cell tends to be neat. It's like, oh, they're going to kill themselves? What's happening today? Are they planning on giving things away? You know, but again, it's really the baseline. For him, if his cell was destroyed, that would be a problem for me. If he didn't bother me when something's a little off-centered, I would be like, hey, that's weird. You know, we're late with food, and he hasn't made a concern about it just yet. But with that said, I like what Russ said. The baseline matters. And I think for him, it's more about control. So I think he's going to be very good with this level of control. And if there are any changes, no matter how small, that's where staff's going to have to try to figure out how to work that out with him. And that's where mental health could also be a resource. I think the biggest concern I would have for him are any things that can influence a subtle change. And then how is he going to handle with that change? Because I also think this too. Each routine falls into another routine, falls into another routine. So it's like hyper control, if you will. So once you move one, it's like a domino effect for this individual. So you have to be aware, no matter how small of an inch you may think it is, this person walks that fine line where every inch matters. Now, the second question I got on this one, Russ, is how do you manage someone in long-term isolation whose mind is starting to collapse inwards, especially when they're following all the technical rules?
You know, I think that, you know, one thing I would say about, you know, people that are in that situation, you know, based on the crimes that they've already done, you know, based on their history up to that point, it's not really such a big leap to understand that people who are already like that are much more likely to come unraveled, if you will. They're the ones that, you know, it's not a big mystery. You know, would we see it in normal everyday people just as much? Probably not. I think that, you know, trying to, you know, move them into situations where they can function more efficiently based on their needs is really important. You know, just for the smooth operation of the entire facility. It's not about one individual. But doing that, you know, often, you know, brings a lot of difficulties with it, especially if we're talking about, you know, certain types like, man, you start talking about, you know, trying to put any particular STGs together, you know, even the same STG, you know, they all have, you know, their conflicts and their politics and their decisions to, you know, go ahead and, you know, kill each other off, let alone other STGs that they're already fighting with. And so there's a lot to it. And one of the things that they're going to have to do with him, obviously, he's not in a STG as far as I know, but being able to get the right assessments done to try and figure out, you know, what type of a threat does he present as far as committing suicide? What type of threat does he present with regards to staff? Because we're not taking anything for granted. What type of threat does he present as far as an escape risk? And all of these things have to be brought to bear. And there's a lot to it. Like some of it, you know, reading his mail to the degree that we can. And like I said, I don't think that there's going to be you know, big issues with lawyers or things anymore because he waived all of that. But you know, there could be some psychopaths out there on the outside that would love to spring him. You know, there's already, I know, some females that are throwing themselves at him for whatever reason. So being able to move him into more of a congregate setting would probably be good, but it's going to have to be on the level of the same people that are similar to him. And, you know, probably not any type of, you know, STGs who might want their own notoriety for whatever reason, because they don't necessarily, you know, have, you know, anything that's holding them back from killing someone like him.
All right, now, so a guy like this is going to be seeing mental health almost every day, definitely Monday through Friday, and usually in close custody units where there's a chance that they are isolated. Again, I prefer non-congregate. mental health is going to have to be there to balance that type of interaction that's needed to keep the person where they need to be. So with that said, I think for him, routine, as we mentioned, rules are going to matter. This inmate is going to know anytime someone deviates from an expected expectation or a rule or whatever it is, no matter how small, because somewhere along the line, it's going to affect him. And remember, we talked about, like how we mentioned, there is no spectrum here. It's either he's going to be calm or he's going to explode. I mean, and then because it's funny, because if you take away something from the routine and you go to introduce it back, they calm right back down again almost instantly. It's super quick. It's like they'll flip out when there's a shift, and then the moment you realize it or you do something to put the shift back to where they need to be, they calm down almost immediately, because they fall back into the comfort of whatever that established routine is or expectation. Now, I will say this. Oh, go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say, one thing that people should be thinking about too, with regards to things that are going to potentially, mediate his mood and any mental issues that he may have. He's certainly going to be, eligible for all kinds of visits. And, it's my understanding at this point that, he has had family members that have visited him. There's also, a great deal of, interest in him in particular. So I'm sure that there's going to be, potentially journalists, and I don't know what Idaho does with regards to that. He's certainly going to have a chance at, having certain girlfriends because of the way that there's some sub cliques out there with hybristophilia and so forth that are going to be very interested in him. So he's going to have that too. It's not going to be just contact with staff. It's not going to be just contact with mental health. He's going to have, other potential social contacts out there for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, and speaking of that, it's worked a lot, because they also could affect his routine, who he writes to,
yes.
All that stuff. So again, people from the outside also have to be aware that stuff that they do that could affect his routine could also affect how we manage him on the inside. A death of a loved one who he's dependent on for visits could truly affect him a lot more than it may affect the general population. So having that good working relationship with mental health. And I will say this too, one other thing, if there is a small shift that has to be done or whatever it is, when mental health speaks to them, because mental health will be a part of this along with custody, we're going to have to work together on this one. They're going to have to identify why before the shift, whatever's in place before the shift, why is it so important? So again, it's not so much about losing something, but why is it so important that you have to hold on to it? And they have to work with that individual from that level so they can gradually go into whatever that new shift will be. Because I think that's the key with anything with change. People get worried about, one, the loss of something, and two, how quick it can happen. So now if you have someone that's at this level of control, where they need control, this is where you have to make sure that it's introduced gradually and you meet all the needs of what he's going to expect to be handled before he goes into whatever that shift is. And in corrections, even though we are rigid and we are highly controlled, we do go through a lot of changes, legislation, all this stuff. So that changes have to be communicated to all inmates. So he may be someone that you may spend a little bit more time with. Okay, so now this moves us to section 2. I wanted to go back and go to his background a little bit. So intelligence, routine, and the illusion of control. So now we're going to kind of, it's a big part of the discussion here. The situation. So Kohberger is intelligent, book smart, routine driven, but that doesn't mean stable. Obsessive behaviors, hand washing, pacing, emotional flatness. These aren't just quirks. They're signs. And smart inmates often know how to make compliance look like calm when it's really control. That's key. I want to mention that again. They're signs. A smart inmate often knows how to make compliance look like calm when it's really control. Kind of what we discussed before, where he's going to look compliant because he wants to follow the schedule because it gives him a sense of control. But be advised, it's not so much about him being compliant with the system, but rather him needing that sense of control to be fulfilled. Now, what's the correctional focus here? Officers must distinguish between routine that's helping and routine that's hiding something. When structure becomes obsession, it stops being stabilizing and starts becoming a mask for something deeper. So, Russ, how can officers recognize when obsessive behavior is really about control and not adaptation?
So, when you see all of these, different little, let's call them ticks within their personalities, you've got to know that when you're dealing with these individuals, that interrupting their ticks or doing something that takes them, out of their normal orbit, really can, send them into the stratosphere with regards to lashing out. Um, it's been my experience, but once again, always universal precautions. That tends to be kind of transitory. But the fact that some of these people are compulsive obsessive, I would never ever rule out that they could hold a grudge and then plan to do something. Though, like I say, it tends to be something that does erupt in that moment. But I would never get complacent and say, oh well, now that time has passed. So staff have to look, really closely at that. The potential for violence, is always, very near. I don't know what type of setting that they're going to have him in initially. I imagine it will be something analogous to ADSEG, where they might, only bring him out if he's actually, restrained for a while. Later on, he will probably be adapted, like Anthony said, into some more congregate type of living where there may be like a day room program or something like that. It's just going to have to be, based on staff observation and seeing how he acts and reacts to things, on his day in, day out schedule. And once again, going back to universal precautions, my take on the guy is that even if he explodes, I don't see him as presenting a huge danger to staff, but you never can tell. I always want to put that out there because I think that I think he just doesn't seem to have the heart to actually, want to do anything. He seems really timid with regards to the way he just took. I mean, he just took that chance at avoiding the death penalty, even though Idaho's death penalty is really, really broken. But I say that here from a distance, but still based on a little bit of evaluated experience from some of the killers and serial killers and gangbangers that I've known over the years.
All right. So for me, I'm going to say, how do officers recognize when obsessive behavior is really about control, not adaptation? So our officers are trained with dealing with inmates that have mental health concerns. I mean, we do have mental health units. I mean, correctional facilities now house probably more inmates with mental health concerns than actually state hospitals do. And I meant to say more people, not more inmates. So with that said, I believe, again, knowing the individual, knowing are they reliant on the system? That's a lot different than being compliant. Are they reliant? And here's the funny thing about this all too. For an inmate, let's say like Kohberger, and I'm sure we'll have a few inmates like this that people have dealt with, there's a sense of submitting to the system and how it runs in the routine, being rigid, I guess, because in your mind, that is your control. Your control is submitting to the system. So it's funny how that dynamic is. Like, you put control. It's like, well, I don't want to be controlled, but yet you're being controlled by the routine. Yes, because I've accepted that. I've allowed that. So I'm good with that. And that maybe deep down they know they can't challenge that either, but there's somewhere where they convince themselves that they've allowed for this routine to work. There's some level of control, and then they work within that. They work within that. Let's just say that. But with that said, I've noticed staff, when there's a change that's going to happen, no matter how small or how sudden, they may say, like, these inmates won't like it. Okay, fine. This may not work well with this inmate. That's a different perspective now. All right, so most inmates won't like change, but they'll adapt, they'll adjust, they'll get through it. It's what they do. They're survivals. You know, they're survivors. This inmate may be a bit different. So if you notice, sometimes that staff that really know the inmates or mental health professionals that really know the inmates, they may come and say, hey, I know we're going through this change, and I know that the inmate population has to deal with it. But with that said, we have to figure out how we're going to do it a little bit differently for them, because or maybe introduced a little bit differently. The outcome can still be the same, but this may not work with the established routine we have for this individual. So I think it's kind of understanding that compliance is not this. I'm sorry, relying is not the same as compliance. So if you have an individual that's truly reliant on that system, on that routine, that's a lot different than being compliant, because when they're reliant, they've accepted the fact that they're in control of that routine. And now when you put a sudden change to it, it's not just about the change, it's the fact that they've lost control and they want it back. So the best way to convince them that they're getting it back is to try to suggest the change is still working in accordance with what they would expect, what they would want, that it meets their needs. So kind of try to give it to them as if, yes, we're pushing it down, but as if it's up to them to accept it. And it's a very delicate dance, but it's done every day with these type of inmates. Now, Russ, there's a second question for this too. What does masking compliance look like? We kind of discussed this in high profile or intelligent inmates, and how should housing or observation change in response?
So, you got to understand that, inmates are always wanting something else, from any given situation. So there are some of them that will, mask compliance. They will act like they are going along with the program. While in the meantime, they may be willing to lash out at some point. They might be thinking that they're going to file a grievance. Some of the ones, that have a lot of access to the legal system, are going to maybe be filing suit. And it just kind of depends. These individuals, they all act and react in different ways sometimes. But certain ones you can kind of, put a filter on and know how they're going to go along with things or how they're not going to go along with things. So, just seeing what you initially recognize as compliance may not be the case. That's why, one of the things we have to stay on top of, all the time with these individuals, are good, healthy searches. If you're not doing good, good contraband interdiction, you can end up putting yourself into a position where somebody gets hurt or killed. So, never accept what's on the face, what you're being presented with as the truth. You have to be able to look beyond that. And that term mask is exactly correct. It's something that is a barrier between what you're seeing and what the actual truth is.
Yeah, and guys, always go beyond the surface. If you get inmates that are too compliant, you should find out why or discover the why. For a case like this, for someone who needs that level of control, we know why they're being compliant. It's because somewhere along the line they become reliant on the routine. And again, that is very key for a housing officer or someone that mental health, or for someone who deals with that inmate every day, to understand they're compliant because they're reliant. So any shift in that routine does mess with their center, does mess with their anchor. All right, let's go to the next part. Got section 3, media attention and psychological performance. The situation. So everyone is watching Kohberger is the most, everyone is watching. Kohberger is the most watched inmate in Idaho, maybe the country. That creates a strange dynamic. He knows he's infamous, so do staff, so do inmates. And when you're being watched, you change how you act. Correctional focus. Some high-profile inmates go inward, others perform. Some become excessively rule-bound to avoid attention. Others act out to control the spotlight. Officers have to manage the behavior, not the backstory. I want to say that again, guys, because that's important. Officers have to manage the behavior, not the backstory. I think the media expects us to manage the backstory. And at the end of the day, I got to manage what's in front of me. And I love this. Let me just read this beginning again. Some high-profile inmates go inward. others perform. Look at all the different dynamics here. Some become obsessively rule-bound to avoid attention. Others act out to control the spotlight. And again, it's really knowing that baseline. Officers have to manage the behavior, not the backstory, but the psychology of attention always finds its way in. So that's another pressure that's being added to our need to watch the inmate, is the pressure of them knowing that they have attention on them. And not just the other inmates, but we're more focused on Kohberger. I mean, that's pressure of attention, and now you have attention-seeking behavior or attention-avoidant behavior. I mean, there's a whole spectrum in between those two extremes. So now, first, I have two questions for this, Russ. First question, what behaviors do officers see when inmates start performing for the system or the spotlight? So these are people that are performative. I don't think Kohberger may fall into this, but you never know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think he does, because I think that, if he wanted to stay in the spotlight, he would have gone ahead and had his trial, and the consequences of the death penalty be damned. So I kind of, wonder, what it is that he do. At one point, I kind of, envisioned him, watching the nightly news, waiting to see if he was on there. But I actually don't think that's the case anymore. I think he's, and like I say, these are just my guesses. I think that he is probably strangely disinterested in things, except for getting away from it. Now, this might affect him a little bit later on, because he's not gonna have any upcoming trial dates. He's not gonna have any pending appeals. He's not going to have, those type of mile markers along the way of his case anymore, because he took the deal. So depending on what his baseline is right now, if he was really truly plugged into all of that stuff, I wouldn't have expected that out of him. But in this case, he may not be able to see the writing on the wall that he's going to kind of just fade away, over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, and he's going to kind of be forgot about unless he lashes out. But we don't know necessarily that attention seeking is really what he's going for, other than maybe, anonymous attention seeking, but he's kind of already screwed that up. So, there's a lot of other things where inmates will lash out, though. They'll raise their voice. They will make threats. And I mean, sometimes specific and graphic threats. Sometimes they will follow through on threats. Sometimes they will manufacture weapons. And one of the big things that they really do, though, is, the grievance system. And many of them that are like this individual that we're talking about will use and abuse the system by filing, an endless number of grievances. So, so that's one thing, that staff are constantly having to deal with. And so there's a whole range of those things. I've seen guys do stuff that was just so off the wall, and you didn't know if it was in response or they were acting out. I had one particular inmate, he placed a bunch of, plastic and stuff that he got up against the bars, and he filled his cell about a quarter of the way with water. And then he was in there just doing sit-ups. And of course, his baseline was already really, really skewed out there. And so, I just want people to know that in corrections, we deal with some of the most off-the-wall stuff that you can imagine. And it's very difficult many times to understand exactly what's going on. But I still think that we do it better than most.
Yeah. So, guys, obviously for something like this, when it really is all about behavior, I don't think Kohberger may want the attention, because sometimes attention forces things to change. And Kohberger may just want to settle. So, again, if there's attention, management say, hey, you know what? There's too much attention here. Let's move them over here. Let's do this. Let's do that. But then you do get some inmates who like the attention because they can use it as leverage. I've seen it. Hey, I need this. If you don't give me this, I just got to make one phone call, and watch how fast media floods in. It's actually predator behavior. They use the attention for leverage, and it's funny because sometimes the exchange would be stupid. Okay, I'll give you that interview you want. And the media gives them the attention, and all they come back with is a whole article on the type of toothpaste that they're using behind the wall. I mean, it's just because they know they have the attention at that moment. Eventually, at any moment, the attention could die out, but they know in that moment they have it, and they will take advantage of it. But as I said, there are some people that just want it to be done with. I'm done. I don't want to be the center of attention, especially for these reasons, or, all this attention does is just move me around. So right now I want the attention to stop. And I agree with what Russ said about him not wanting to go to trial. I think that is a good understanding of someone that may not want attention, because if I would want attention, I'm going to seek the higher levels of publicity, and trial would be one of it. I know I'm going to jail for life or prison for life. I know it. So at this point here, why not prolong the process? Why not hold myself into that spotlight as long as I can? So I think there's a level where he's accepted his fate, and now this attention part, he may just be done with. So I don't see him as people that are trying to perform. But with that said, if there are routines that happen and, whatever it is, and there are sudden changes, it doesn't mean he can't utilize that attention to his own advantage. I just don't think he's someone that's going to be dropping it all the time. I think if he does it, it's going to be very strategic. It's going to be a little bit more purposeful in regards to, rules, or how he goes ahead and defends the need to keep things the way it is. There's another question here for this section, Russ. How do you keep public attention from altering your professional routine or your perception of the inmates? And I want to say one thing with here. I never let the urgent sacrifice the important. All because there's pressure from the outside does not mean that you have to change what's happening on the inside. Their pressure is coming from what they interpret, not what's really happening. And then you get some people that are in these positions that are worried that the pressure from the media could affect how they're seen. Don't worry about vanity. And don't worry about urgency. Worry about what's important. And I'm going to tell you something. It's great to see that even when the media is pressuring things based on interpretations or assumptions, that the facility and the managing of that inmate still stays consistent with the values of what is meant in regards to the trusted expectations of safety and security. Because in the end, if you got the pressure of the media, which is going to happen almost a lot with cases like this, you can't keep shifting like the wind. You have to at one point hold your ground and say, this is what it is. I don't care what they're saying at the outside. And this is how it's being handled on the inside. I control that, not what you're running on from the outside. What's your thoughts on that, Russ? Would you agree? Urgency versus the important.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the really horrible things truly about the media is they push narratives because they want to sell articles so that they can sell advertising. And, somewhere in there might be a tiny grain of truth, but it's not the overall truth. And so, it's just, for lack of a better term, but very true with regards to, like social media and the internet. I mean, it's all clickbait anymore. And so they're not really trying to get at any, real objective truths. They're trying to get to their version of a truth, that sells advertising. And so, I've seen that over and over again, especially with, some recent stories that have happened here in California. And they just don't seem like they're devoted toward anything but the almighty buck. And in fact, they would sacrifice the truth to sell more newspapers, more advertising, more whatever it is. So anyway, I think that's just something we have to be real careful of, because the media has no problem making us out into being the boogeyman.
All right, now we got number 4, placement decisions don't end at intake. So the situation. Bryan Kohberger is housed in long-term restrictive housing at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, so that's IMSI, isolated from other inmates due to his notoriety and the nature of his crimes. On paper, it's protective custody, but in reality, placement for high-profile inmates is never simple. It must account for behavior, risk, psychological stability, and the ripple effect of their presence. By the way, this is all managed definitely initially at the floor level as well from those officers who, once they're put into where they're supposed to be assigned, the officers have to make sure that there are no added risks. So it's funny because everybody behind the scenes will do what's best from paper, but the officers are what see are who truly see reality. And then that's why it's good for them to also have those strong resources with them, like mental health, medical, all those treatment providers. So even in isolation, high-profile inmates generate attention, sometimes from outside the facility. So there's spotlight here. So infamy attracts infamy. I want to go to Jesperson, his public offer. So in early of 2025, Keith Hunter Jesperson, better known as the Happy Face Killer, so that's him here, made a public statement offering to become Bryan Kohberger's cellmate. Jesperson claimed, let's give it to that housing the two of them together would solve security concerns, suggesting they could relate to each other on a psychological level. That offer was not taken seriously by correctional officials. Jesperson is incarcerated in Oregon, and such a placement would never be approved. But the message behind this statement is clear. Infamy attracts infamy. Inmate notoriety breeds interest, competition, and psychological games, even act across state lines. A little bit about Keith Jesperson is a convicted serial killer and former long-haul truck driver who murdered at least 8 women between 1990 and 1995, although he claimed to have killed more than 160. His crimes spanned multiple states, and he typically strangled his victims, often after meeting them at truck stops or bars. So it's funny. Yeah, let's have him further encourage or cultivate Kohberger into, maybe he thinks who Kohberger needs to be. His first known murder was Miss Bennett, Tanya Bennett, looks like, or Tonya Bennett in Oregon. When another couple was wrongfully arrested, Jesperson began writing anonymous confessions to newspapers, signing them with a smiley face, which earned him the nickname Happy Face Killer. He was eventually arrested after killing his girlfriend, Julie Winningham, in 1995. He confessed to multiple murders and was convicted. Jesperson is currently serving multiple life sentences at Oregon State Penitentiary and has continued to write letters to media, sometimes engaging in murderabilia and making public comments on other cases. So now I just want to mention something here. Look at the extreme here. You have someone that wants attention, possibly trying to get the attention that Kohberger has now and trying to kind of bring himself back into the spotlight. So he's an attention seeker, 100%. So why does this matter inside a prison? All right, so Jesperson offer may seem absurd, but to correctional professionals, it's a real warning sign. Inmates may seek connection with high-profile figures for fame, protection, or manipulation. Others may see attacking or befriending someone like Kohberger as a way to gain influence or credibility. So again, still seeking the spotlight. And some, like Jesperson, use the media to insert themselves into current events to maintain relevance or play power games. For staff, this means placement isn't just about inmate behavior inside the walls. It's about how external perceptions and psychological games can creep into institutional stability. So the focus for correctional staff is officers are the eyes and ears on whether a placement is working. Is the inmate deteriorating, strategizing, building a following through mail or media? Kohberger may be physically isolated, but that doesn't mean his influence is. Inmates talk. The public watches. And housing the infamous requires both vigilance and regular reassessment. So now we got 3 questions. This is the only section that has 3 questions. First question, Russ. What specific behaviors might suggest a high-profile inmate's placement is beginning to fuel psychological fixation or outside influence?
Can you post that one?
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah, what role should... I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Oh, hold on, Russ. I changed that question. I apologize. It's this one. What role should officers play in ongoing housing reviews, especially for high-profile or psychologically complex inmates? I meant that one. Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah. So, so looking at this one, just the easiest thing to say about this is you're not going to get any better of a baseline than you are from the officers that are in that unit from day to day and, knowing and who know and are able to evaluate what's going on with a particular inmate. It's odd in this situation that, you have the happy face killer who wants to do this and bring attention to himself. I would say that under almost any circumstances, absolutely not. But I would imagine, and even though I do not believe that would happen, I would actually believe that there might be a certain number of law enforcement people who would like to see that happen, who are actively involved in looking at those other cases that the happy face killer is involved in. They might think that they might, actually be able to come up with, some leads in some other cases. But other than that, I would be very wary about that, because I think that the happy face killer might just want to kill Bryan Kohberger, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just be another way also to screw the system. I got you to place me there and screw the system again. It could be many reasons why he'd want to do it. It's being famous could be connected to so many different motives. But I think the one thing with him is being able to screw the system. But I will tell you one thing. I like what you mentioned before about trying to get two of them connected so they can wind up just kind of bedroom gossip, whatever it is. But again, I don't think Kohberger wants attention. I think Kohberger will eventually accept that this is where his fate is. So I don't think there would be any leverage that could be introduced to Kohberger at a certain point that will get him to say, hey, put me with this guy, and then whatever he tells me, I'm going to go ahead and share it with you. Kohberger's not social, so he's not going to want somebody that's talkative right next to him.
Yeah, and let's be clear too that another reason this would be really unlikely to happen is they would have to enact some sort of interstate compact, which I don't know, they may already have that because of close proximity of Oregon and Idaho, but that's what it would require for either side to accept housing from another inmate there, and that's generally, a lot of different headaches go along with that, as I'm sure you would know far better than me.
Yeah, we deal with those a lot. And I will say you never accept a request from an inmate because you never know what the motives are. So it's like, well, requests for moves will come from prison management mostly, but hopefully after they've consulted with the people on the floor. But I couldn't imagine these guys being housed together where you have one guy that's at this extreme attention getter and the other guy that's looking to try to, let's be done with this all. And again, even the personalities, the characteristics of a guy that's probably very talkative, loves, happy face killer. I mean, literally connects to that name, loves the fact that it brings him fame. I'm sure he'll spend most of his time trying to talk about that. And Kohberger will probably be sitting there like, hey, what are you doing here? And I'll be funny because it may be Kohberger that winds up killing him. At some level, you never know. But again, it wouldn't be something that anybody would take seriously. But it goes to show you the argument that infamy chases infamy. So his story's done, and he's trying to connect to Kohberger's now. I got two more on this section real quick, Russ. Next one is, what observable changes should trigger a reevaluation of where and how someone like Kohberger's housed? We kind of discussed that, to be honest with you. But if I can mention something real quick here. This could probably be a quick one, is that you don't really want to keep somebody a non-congregate forever. You don't. It's really not healthy. It puts a lot of pressure on staff. So eventually, maybe for someone like him, he could be housed in a treatment unit, which is a little bit more isolated, but it allows for controlled interactions. But ultimately, what would probably wind up being the next step is eventually, once all this dies down a bit, is to try to introduce him safely to other inmates on PC or other inmates that may be in a therapeutic community, so he could start building some levels of relationships. Now, granted, he is autistic, it said, and he has other social concerns, so maybe that may not be the best route for him. But most of the time, you don't really want to keep somebody in isolation. So technically, if you feel that they're falling backwards because they need more interaction and more communication, then you would try to have them interact with other individuals. But I have a feeling with someone like this, because I've seen it, they'd rather be alone. And when you start putting them with other people, it doesn't blend well. And now the problem is now you have to try to get them back to being by themselves because they pose a risk to the other person as well as themselves. So you really have to treat it as a case-by-case basis, because you're never really going to find Some of them will even say, well, I'll be okay if I deal with this cellmate. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. You can't suggest who you're going to house with, like we just mentioned. So I think for him, if he's isolated, you don't want him isolated long term, but there could be a chance that if you go to put him with someone else, he's just not socially adequate enough to handle that, and he may be better by himself. I've seen inmates that can manage time by themselves because they'd rather not be with anyone. And the moment you put them with somebody is when they start acting out, and you start seeing them lose that sense of control. Because that's another thing with Kohberger. He wants control. If you put him with someone else or you house him with someone else where now he has to try to manage his own behavior, but now also deal with another individual who could be spontaneous or whatever it is, that interaction may not be something that he's going to want. So I don't always think it's in the best interest to house people that may not want to be housed with anyone. We kind of discussed that, Russ, unless you have anything you want to add to that and get to the other question.
No.
Okay, the last question for this section was, what does it mean when another high-profile inmate like Jesper's, and I think we covered this too, tries to align with the new one, and how should administrators anticipate or neutralize that influence? I think we discussed that, right, Russ?
Yeah, we did.
Let's go to, okay, I have 2 more sections left. Safety as leverage. So Kohberger has his own schedule, solo yard, isolated rec, no group meals, no general movement. That's what high-profile housing looks like, but routines cut both ways. If not managed tightly, they become a currency the inmates control. Correctional focus. Staff must run the routine, not have it run them. We kind of talked on this already. That means holding boundaries, resisting manipulation, cloaked in simple requests, and staying alert when routines are weaponized or influenced attention or influence, then you have attention or power. The 2 questions I have here, Russ, are when does an inmate's routine start becoming a power play, and what warning signs do staff see first? So that's the first of 2 questions. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Well, as long as they're staying within the bounds of a routine that's been created and approved, it's not a problem. What happens is when they're starting to try and gain special favors, special property, special dispensations to talk or write to certain people. When we start letting them color outside the lines of things that other inmates do not get, that's the problem where we're starting to, fall into a level of, actual complacency, where we believe that we're the ones in control, and yet the inmate is moving us off of our game and causing us to either develop new policy and procedure for them, or we're coloring outside the lines where we're abandoning policy and procedure and letting them, get special things or special dispensations of some type. So you have to be very careful with that, because otherwise, what would happen is we can end up creating a super class of inmates that we're all lumping into doing this one thing, for this one specific subclass of inmates. And a lot of those things can be dangerous with regards to safety and security. And like I say, it's all of those things. It's changing policy and procedure, ignoring policy and procedure, giving them, special rights to certain types of what would normally be, contraband or not allowed, or the amount of property, whatever. And we don't want that. We have to exercise control. We have to keep control. And after all, there's nobody better at doing that than correctional staff.
Yeah, and guys, obviously corrections is run on a routine, so there's a level of predictability, and you don't want that predictability to be exploited. That's why some procedures can vary. I think for an inmate like Kohberger, the predictability also gives them a safety. It gives them an expectation. So they're probably just going to push for what's expected and not looking to change the system or circumvent the system. Again, I just don't think he has the charisma to do that. He may have the want to do that. He just may want to establish something and hold on to it. So again, the predictability of staff here for him may serve as a benefit for him, but staff are going to have to realize, how to make sure they do it without becoming too predictable for other inmates who may want to utilize that to circumvent policies and procedures, because again, professional predictability is needed because there are certain things that inmates need to expect, being, fed, safety and security, all that good stuff. And that falls into a defined routine. So I think for someone like Kohberger, he'll be relying on that, and the predictability may be needed a little bit more. So that's why I think eventually it would be a good bet for him to go to a more therapeutic community, where you have inmates that are, again, nothing's 100%, but really are connected to the routine because they need the routine because they're relying on it, as opposed to trying to exploit the routine. Okay, Russ, next question for this one, last part here for this part, and then we have one more section, is how can consistent policy-driven scheduling prevent high-profile inmates from gaining control through repetition or staff fatigue? We kind of touched on this, but
yeah, we did.
Anything you want to add?
No, not really. I think we've kind of covered that. It just has to be one of those things that's in the back of your mind, but you also have to be able to regulate yourself and understand that following into a routine blinds you to the possibilities or probabilities that something else is going to happen that's bad. This is all part of complacency. And I talk in my book, I have a whole chapter, the complacency of routine, and that's something that we have to be aware of, and we have to constantly put it in its place.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure people are aware. Also, staff could get burned out, so they look to do things that are more convenient. But again, when it comes to someone like Kohberger, I know this is more about high-profile inmates. How can consistent policy-driven scheduling prevent high-profile inmates from gaining control through repetition or stat? There is that, as we talked about, a level of professional predictability. So you have to manage those expectations, but you also have to allow for the fluidity of adjustment if needed. If you don't have that, then you do become too predictable. So the expectations are predictable, but sometimes how it's carried out may not be as predictable. All right, last section, the ripple effect, inmate culture and staff morale. All right, so let me get to the last part here. Kohberger doesn't just affect his own cell. He changes the whole climate. Inmates talk, staff talk. Some are scared, some are curious. Some want to be the one who handles him. And the moment he becomes different, the institution becomes unstable. High-profile housing must be normal housing, operationally, emotionally, culturally. That's what keeps morale up and gossip down. It's not about ignoring the profile. It's about preventing the profile from taking over the culture. And that's what we talked about, outside pressure from the media. What does it look like when one inmate starts affecting the tone of a whole unit, and how can leadership reset the culture? And then the other question is, how do frontline staff manage their own emotional response to housing someone whose crimes or cases trigger personal reaction? So I'll get these two answered real quick for me, and then Russ can do yours so we can come to a close, because we're already over an hour. Is what does it look like when one inmate starts affecting the tone of a whole unit, and how can leadership reset the culture? You can't deal with outside pressure. And we talked about that before with the media. Media for high-profile inmate is going to come with the inmate, and that's the inmate. They're inmates that are looking to exploit that. That gives them leverage. You have to be able to control that. That's where everybody has to be working together to not allow the media to influence how we run things, especially if we're doing things the correct way, because once they see that the media can have an influence of it, then the inmate starts having some level of control, and then staff become more hesitant because they don't want to be put in the spotlight. So again, I think that's where we have to come together, defend the staff that are doing the job. I mean, yes, be transparent with the media, but they have to, you don't always give them blind yeses. A lot of their stuff is coming from assumptions, and you can't be running on assumptions. You run on reality. And the moment that you allow the media to dictate what we're doing because you're afraid that's going to put a negative spotlight on the facility, you're going to wind up finding yourself being in control by not just the media, but the inmate who's got that media's attention. That's key. And the second question is, how do frontline staff manage their own emotional response to housing someone whose crimes or case trigger personal reactions? They don't make it personal. I mean, that's what we tell staff all the time. This isn't personal. You're going to manage people that have done some horrendous things, and it's tough, but we have to balance and be professional. So we of course, we know what they've done for safety and security reasons. That does matter to us. but we don't allow it to affect how we do our job. And it doesn't mean we agree with what they've done, but if they're entitled to things, they get it. If they're not entitled, they don't get it. And at the end of the day, for the inmates that say, oh, we're being treated this way because we've done this crime, no, you're being treated that way because you got in trouble inside the facility and you're not following the rules and expectations of what we laid out. So in the end, staff are trained not to take it personal. We remain professional, even if there's a crime that could affect us. And if it gets to a point where we can't do our job, we write to our supervisor and let it be known. Hey, listen, right now I'm too connected to this. I'm trying to work myself through it. Is there any way that I could be reassigned? And we will work with staff as long as it's something that is not a routine thing just to get out of a post. We don't want that either. But in the end, we're professional. We don't take it personal. And to us, it's a job. It's a job. Again, we don't focus on the backstory. We focus on the behavior that's right in front of us. Hey, Russ, any closing remarks for these two questions?
Yeah, I just want, people to know that, like, when we're talking about, how do we have an expectation like that with staff, on any given day on the individuals that I was dealing with, Bryan Kohberger to me would have been just, another killer. Has he got some infamy behind him? Yeah. So do the other, 56 guys or whatever on my tier. So this isn't anything new for staff. Staff know exactly how to deal with these people. Staff know exactly, what they need to do to, function effectively and safely. And so, like I say, for me, there's another spree killer on my tier. So what? I'm going to move on. And while I say so what flippantly, I'm not going to be complacent about it. But it comes right down to it. Yeah, he's just another killer. It's just another killer on my tier.
Yeah, and guys, for those that get caught up in the story and then make that person more famous than they should be, shame on you. If you're an officer and you're bragging about these people on your tier because of who they're famous, then you shouldn't be in that position, because I'm going to tell you something that could be used against you. I have seen people get caught up with a celebrity and, oh my God, I can't believe he's in my unit. Well, now he's not going to be in your unit. Now you are going to another post, because if you act that way, because that person is now coming to your unit and acting on their backstory, if you will, that's going to easily leak out. And there's no way you're going to have control of that inmate, because they're not that celebrity anymore. They're an inmate. And like Russ said, whatever crime they did, they're an inmate, and they're not to be treated different at all. And if you can't deal with that because you're so starstruck, then you shouldn't be in corrections at all, because people either come in famous or they do a crime that makes them famous, and they get on the news and all of a sudden like, oh my God, that's him. That's him. The moment you're saying, oh my God, that's him, or oh my God, that's her, hopefully you're not the officer in that unit, because already there, it looks like you lost a little bit of control. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in close? Hopefully you agree with that, what I just said.
Oh yeah, it's just like I'll just give a quick example, and then we'll go or whatever. But we had a situation at one prison that I was working at where the media was just so intense about this one particular person who was being paroled, that they actually ended up bringing her to our male prison to parole her from, which was Ellie Nessler. And it was just such a big, huge headache. No one cared that she had become infamous or famous, depending on how you looked at her crime. She gunned down and killed a guy at a courtroom just down the road from here, as a matter of fact, who had definitely preyed upon her child, which was a bad thing all around. But in the end, it was just bad for her. It was bad for her child, and she ended up doing her time and getting out for killing this individual. But for us, working that day, it was just a hassle. It wasn't about, oh my gosh, Ellie Nessler's here, and for us, it was just a hassle, and making sure that we avoided any media showing up. And So, kudos to, everyone that worked that particular night. So anyway, I hope some people learned some things, and catch you on the next one.
Yep. And guys, as always, more to come, but please stay safe and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Let's grow this channel. There's a lot of content on here that's useful, not just in prison, but in the real world. As always, guys, stay safe.